The marketplace of the broken. The galactic auction house orbited a dying star, its metal walls gleaming with the cold light of distant suns. Inside the massive structure, thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds gathered for the monthly liquidation sale. This was where the galaxy disposed of its mistakes, its failures, its unwanted experiments. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through the crowded corridors, with her hands in her pockets and doubt in her heart. The young xenobiologist from Earth had spent her entire research grant just getting here, traveling 3 months across space to attend an auction that most respectable scientists avoided. Her colleagues had called her crazy. Her mentor had warned her she was throwing away her career. But Elena had read something in an obscure research paper that nobody else seemed to notice. A footnote about a species called the Melodians, engineered by the Thracian Empire as living weapons. The project had been abandoned 20 years ago when the Melodians proved to be defective. Too emotional, too unpredictable, useless for military purposes. The Thracians had sold off their mistakes and moved on to more efficient killing machines. Now, the last surviving Melodians were scattered across the galaxy, owned by collectors, researchers, and entertainment facilities. Most died young, from genetic instabilities built into their DNA by their creators. Elena's research suggested the instabilities weren't accidents. They were deliberate kill switches, designed to prevent the Melodians from living long enough to become independent. But she thought she could fix them, if she could just get her hands on one specimen. The auction hall was enormous, with hovering platforms displaying items in transparent containment fields. Elena walked past cages holding strange creatures, tanks containing exotic plants, and stasis pods preserving biological specimens. Everything here had been deemed worthless by somebody, somewhere. This song in the shadows. She found lot 847 in the back corner, far from the main bidding floor. The containment field was weak and flickering, suggesting the auctioneers hadn't bothered with proper maintenance. Inside sat a Melodian, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. The being was roughly humanoid, about 2 meters tall, with skin that shifted through colors like oil on water. But it was the crystalline structures growing along its spine and shoulders that truly marked it as Melodian. These biocrystals were supposed to resonate with emotional frequencies, allowing Melodians to communicate through something the Thracians called feeling songs. This particular Melodian was male, according to the catalog, and his designation was M4719. No name, just a number. His crystals, which should have been gleaming with iridescent light, were dull and gray. His skin barely cycled through colors, stuck in muted shades of blue and gray that suggested deep sadness. The catalog listing was brutally honest. Melodian specimen, male, age 12 standard years, severe genetic degradation, estimated survival time, 6 to 8 months, crystal resonance, minimal, emotional stability, poor, value, salvage only, recommended use, biological component harvesting. They were selling him for parts. Elena stood in front of the containment field for a long time, just watching. M4719 sat with his back against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest. His eyes were closed, and she thought he might be sleeping. Then she noticed his lips moving, forming words in a language she didn't recognize. She pulled out her translation device and aimed it at the field. The device struggled for a moment, then provided subtitles in standard English. Remember the sky. Remember the color of home. Remember the feeling of sun. Remember, remember, remember. It was a mantra, Elena realized. He was trying to hold on to memories before they faded away, before he faded away. The auction began at 500 credits. Nobody bid. The auctioneer, a bored centurion with too many eyes, dropped the price to 300, then 200, then 100. Still nothing. Melodians were considered bad investments. They died too quickly to provide useful research data, and their emotional nature made them difficult to control. 50 credits, the auctioneer announced with disgust. Final offer before disposal. Elena's hand shot up. 50 credits. Several nearby bidders turned to stare at her, a human buying a Melodian. Humans were new to the galactic stage, barely established enough to have researchers at these auctions. What could she possibly want with a dying specimen? Sold to the human, the auctioneer said quickly, clearly wanting to move on to more profitable lots. Next item. First contact. The transfer process was simple but sad. Elena provided her credentials and payment, and they simply deactivated the containment field. M4719 opened his eyes when the field dropped, looking around with confusion and fear. When he saw Elena approaching, he pressed himself harder against the wall. "It's okay," Elena said softly, holding up her empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Elena." The Melodian's eyes were large and dark, with flecks of light that might have been stars reflected in deep water. He studied her face carefully, and Elena got the strange impression he was reading something in her expression that went deeper than words. "You bought me?" His voice was rough from disuse, but it carried harmonics that made Elena's translator device hum. Even weak and dying, there was something musical about the way Melodian spoke. "I'm a scientist," Elena explained. "I study genetics. I think I can help you." "Help?" The word seemed foreign to him. Nobody helps defective products. They use us, or they dispose of us. Which are you planning? The bitterness in his voice cut through Elena like a blade. This being had known only 12 years of life, and all of it had been suffering. Born in a laboratory, raised as a weapon, discarded when he failed to meet expectations, and now dying slowly from genetic sabotage. "Neither," Elena said firmly. "I want to fix what they did to you. I want to give you a chance to live." M4719 laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You can't fix Melodian genetic degradation. The Thracians made sure of that. The kill switches are woven into every cell. I'm dying, human scientist. Maybe 6 months left, maybe less. What if I told you I've spent 3 years studying Melodian genetics?" Elena pulled out her datapad and showed him screens full of genetic sequences and protein models. The Thracians were clever, but they weren't perfect. "I found the switches, and I think I know how to disable them." He stared at the datapad, then at her face. "Why? Why would you spend 3 years studying a failed military experiment?" Elena sat down on the floor in front of him, bringing herself to his eye level. "Because I read the original Thracian research notes. Before they modified you for war. Do you know what Melodians were supposed to be?" He shook his head. "Empaths, healers, beings who could feel and share emotions, who could help others process trauma and find peace. The Thracians found a species with natural empathic abilities and tried to weaponize them. When that didn't work, they blamed you instead of admitting they destroyed something beautiful." Tears were running down M4719's face, leaving trails of color on his skin. "We remember," he whispered. "In our dreams, we remember what we were supposed to be. We remember the songs." "And help me bring that back," Elena said. "Let me try to fix what they broke. Even if I fail, at least you'll know someone tried. Someone thought you were worth saving." Elena's ship was called the Nightingale, and it was cramped but comfortable. She'd converted the cargo bay into a combination laboratory and medical facility, with equipment she'd spent years acquiring. Some of it was borrowed, some was bought secondhand, and some she'd built herself from spare parts. The genetic analysis took 3 days of constant scanning. Lyric lay on the medical table while machines hummed around him, mapping every chromosome, every protein sequence, every cellular structure. Elena worked without sleeping, fueled by coffee and determination. The first treatment. They started the next morning. Elena had designed a 3-phase approach. First, stabilize Lyric's current condition to buy them time. Second, begin carefully disabling the most dangerous kill switches. Third, repair the damage already done and restore his genetic code to something resembling the original Melodian blueprint. The first injection made Lyric scream. His crystals blazed with red light, the color of pain, and his skin flashed through every color in rapid succession. Elena nearly stopped the treatment, but Lyric grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Keep going," he gasped. "I can feel it working. It hurts, but it's fixing something." The process took 6 hours. When it was finally over, Lyric collapsed on the medical table, breathing hard. but his crystals were glowing brighter than Elena had ever seen them. Real light, real color emanating from within. "How do you feel?" she asked. Lyric flexed his hands, studying them with wonder. "Different, stronger, less like I'm falling apart from the inside." He looked at Elena with tears in his eyes. "It's working. It's actually working." "This is just the beginning," Elena warned. "We have a long road ahead. Then let's walk it together." Over the following months, they fell into a routine. Treatment sessions every 3 days, with recovery time in between. Monitoring and analysis constantly. Elena taught Lyric about human genetics, and he taught her about Melodian culture, sharing memories passed down through feeling songs from the few elder Melodians who had survived long enough to pass on their history. She learned that Melodians had once been a peaceful species, living on a planet with 3 moons and purple skies. They had built a civilization based on emotional harmony, where conflicts were resolved through shared feeling rather than violence. When the Thracian Empire found them, she told them about the conflict. They'd been defenseless against military conquest. "They took our children," Lyric told her one night, his crystals glowing soft blue in the darkness of the ship. "The youngest ones with the strongest empathic abilities. They said they were offering us a place in the Empire, that our children would become important. By the time we realized what they were doing, it was too late." "What happened to your homeworld?" Elena asked gently. "The Thracians strip-mined it. The adults were too old to modify, so they were deemed useless. Last I heard, the surviving Melodians were living as refugees, scattered across mining colonies and labor camps. They don't even know what happened to us, the children who were taken." Elena made a decision then. "When we finish fixing you, we're going to find them. We're going to show them that their children survived. And we're going to fix all of you." Lyric's crystals flared with golden light, hope incarnate. "You really believe we can do this?" "I'm human," Elena said with a smile. "We're too stubborn to know when to quit." The breakthrough. Month 5 brought the breakthrough Elena had been working toward. The genetic corrections were holding stable, and Lyric's condition had improved dramatically. His crystals now glowed constantly with healthy iridescence, and his skin cycled through colors naturally, reflecting his emotions in real time. But the most remarkable change was his voice. When Melodians were healthy, their speech carried harmonic frequencies that could directly affect the emotional states of listeners. It was how they'd communicated complex feelings to each other, sharing experiences too deep for words. The first time Lyric's voice resonated properly, Elena felt it like a wave of warmth washing over her. She'd been exhausted from another long night of research when he started humming a traditional Melodian melody. The sound carried colors: gold for joy, green for peace, and silver for gratitude. Elena found herself crying without knowing why, feeling emotions that weren't entirely her own, but somehow were welcome anyway. When Lyric finished, she understood. He was thanking her, not with words, but with pure feeling that bypassed language entirely. "That was incredible," she whispered. "That was me at maybe 30% capacity," Lyric replied, his crystals swirling with excited colors. "Elena, I think your treatments are working better than either of us realize. I can feel my empathic abilities returning. It's like being deaf your whole life and suddenly hearing music." The tests confirmed it. Lyric's neural pathways were regenerating, restoring connections that the Thracians had deliberately severed. His empathic range was expanding daily. Within weeks, he could sense Elena's emotional state from across the ship and could project simple feelings like calm or happiness to help her through difficult moments. "This is what we were meant to be," Lyric said, studying his reflection in a polished metal surface. His crystals were now brilliant, refracting light into rainbow patterns. Not weapons, not tools, healers, the discovery. They were 6 months into treatment when Elena received a priority message that changed everything. A colleague from Earth's Xenological Institute had been monitoring her research from afar, and now sent urgent data. "Elena," the message began, "I've been tracking galactic databases for any mention of Melodians. You need to see this. The attached files contained records from 30 different slave markets, labor camps, and research facilities across the galaxy. Melodians. Dozens of them. All classified as defective or die, scheduled for disposal or euthanasia. There are more of us. Lyric breathed, reading over her shoulder. His crystals blazed with colors Elena had never seen before, emotions too complex for simple naming. They're dying, and nobody cares. We care, Elena said firmly. But we need help. My ship can't rescue dozens of Melodians from across the galaxy. We need resources, support, maybe even military assistance for some of these locations. Lyric's expression hardened with determination. Then we show the galaxy what you've done. We prove that Melodians aren't defective failures. We prove that we're worth saving. The presentation. The Galactic Medical Conference on Station Kepler was the largest gathering of xenobiologists, physicians, and researchers in the known galaxy. Elena had submitted a proposal months ago, never expecting it to be accepted. Human scientists were still considered newcomers, barely worth listening to. But someone on the review committee must have read her abstract carefully because they'd given her a prime presentation slot. Now she stood backstage with Lyric, both of them terrified and excited in equal measure. What if they don't believe us? Lyric asked, his crystals flickering with nervous purple light. Then we make them believe, Elena replied. You ready? The auditorium held 3,000 beings from hundreds of species. Elena walked onto the stage, her small human frame dwarfed by the massive space. But when Lyric followed her, walking tall and healthy and glowing with bioluminescent light, the crowd fell silent. Elena's presentation was simple but devastating. She showed Lyric's medical scans from the day she'd bought him: genetic collapse, organ failure, systemic shutdown. Then she showed his current scans: stable, healthy, regenerating. She explained her treatment methodology, her genetic corrections, and the reversal of Thracian sabotage. But data alone wouldn't have convinced them. What convinced them was Lyric himself. He stood at the center of the stage and did something no Melodian had done in public for 20 years. He sang. Not with his voice alone, but with his whole being. His crystals resonated with harmonic frequencies that filled the auditorium, carrying feelings that transcended language barriers. He sang about loss and pain and survival. He sang about hope and healing and the kindness of one human who saw worth where others saw only waste. He sang about all the Melodian children taken from their families, modified into weapons, discarded when they failed to meet expectations, and dying alone in the darkness. 3,000 beams felt every word, every emotion directly in their hearts. When Lyric finished, the auditorium was completely silent. Then one being began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, creating a thunderous ovation that went on for several minutes. The movement. The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, Elena's research paper was a most downloaded document in galactic medical history. Funding offers poured in from dozens of institutions. Volunteers from multiple species offered to help with rescue operations. But the most important response came from the Galactic Council itself. The Thracian Empire's genetic experimentation program was declared a war crime, and all surviving Melodians were granted protected status. Ownership was nullified. Any being or institution holding Melodians was required to release them immediately for medical treatment. Elena and Lyric became the faces of a movement. They traveled to facility after facility, station after station, collecting Melodians who had been written off as failures. Each one was in terrible condition, some worse than Lyric had been. But with the funding and support of the galactic medical community, Elena assembled a team of geneticists who could replicate her treatment. The first reunion happened 3 months after the conference. Lyric stood in a medical bay, surrounded by 30 other Melodians, all of them at various stages of treatment and recovery. Their crystals lit up the room like a galaxy of stars. And when they began to sing together, the sound was transcendent. Elena watched from the doorway with tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd worked for, not just saving one life, but proving that every life was worth saving. The homecoming. A year after Elena bought Lot 847 at that distant auction house, they made a journey that seemed impossible. The Nightingale, now accompanied by a small fleet of medical and support ships, traveled to the coordinates Lyric had provided. The location of Melodia, the homeworld that had been strip-mined and abandoned by the Thracians. What they found wasn't the dead planet Elena had expected. The Melodian refugees had returned to their ruined world and begun rebuilding. Settlements dotted the scarred landscape, built from salvaged materials and stubborn hope. When the fleet entered orbit, Lyric sent out a signal. Not words, but a feeling song that resonated across the empathic frequencies his species had evolved to use. A message that carried across the void. The children are coming home. A response from the surface was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of Melodians, the parents and siblings and survivors who had been left behind, sent their songs back. Joy, disbelief, desperate hope that this wasn't a dream. The shuttles landed in the largest settlement, and Elena watched as families reunited after 20 years of separation. Parents who had fought their children dead held them close, feeling their life force through empathic connection. Siblings who had been torn apart as children stood together, their crystals resonating in perfect harmony. Lyric found his mother in the crowd. She was old now, her crystals dimmed by years of grief and hardship. But when she saw her son, alive and healthy and glowing with a vibrant light, she made a sound that was part laugh and part sob. They embraced, and their crystals sang together in a frequency that made every Melodian on the planet stop and listen. It was a song of survival, of hope, of love that had endured across years of darkness. The new beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood in a newly constructed research facility on Melodia. The building was a combination of human engineering and Melodian architecture, designed to house the largest genetic research and treatment center in the galaxy. 73 Melodians were now in various stages of treatment. Most would survive. Some would have complications. But all of them would have a chance. And that was more than any of them had possessed before. Lyric worked alongside Elena now, not as a patient but as a colleague. His empathic abilities made him invaluable in medicine, able to sense pain and emotional trauma that scanners couldn't detect. Other recovered Melodians were training as healers, nurses, and counselors, reclaiming the purpose their species had evolved for. The galactic medical community had officially recognized Melodians as having unique medical abilities. Hospitals across the galaxy were requesting Melodian staff, offering real jobs with fair compensation. A species that had been created as weapons was finally becoming what they were always meant to be: healers. Elena stood at the facility's observation deck, watching the purple sky of Melodia turn deep violet as 3 moons rose over the horizon. Lyric joined her, his crystals glowing softly in the twilight. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "You spent your career savings on a dying slave. You risked everything on a theory that could have failed. Would you do it again?" Elena smiled. "Every single time. You taught me something important, Lyric. Science isn't just about understanding how things work. It's about using that understanding to make things better, to fix what's broken, to give hope where there was only despair." "Very human of you," Lyric said with warmth in his voice. "I'll take that as a compliment." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the settlement below come alive with bioluminescent light. As Melodians emerged for the evening, crystals glowed in countless colors, each individual adding their unique light to the growing brightness. From across the settlement, a song began. Not words, but pure emotion carried on harmonic frequencies. It started with one voice, then 2, then dozens, then hundreds. The Melodians were singing together, their crystals resonating in patterns that painted the air with color. Elena couldn't understand the words, but she felt the meaning. It was a song of gratitude, of hope, of a future that had seemed impossible. And somehow, woven throughout the melody, she could feel her own name being honored. The human who had refused to accept that some lives were worth less than others. "What are they singing?" she asked Lyric. His crystals swirled with warm gold light. "They're singing about you,
about the stubborn human scientist who looked at a dying slave in an auction house and saw someone worth saving. They're calling it the Song of Elena, and it will be taught to Melodian children for generations to come.
Elena felt tears on her cheeks. I didn't do this for recognition. I just wanted to help. I know, Lyric said gently. That's what makes the song so beautiful. You helped because it was right, not because it was profitable or easy. That's the most human thing of all, and it's the reason my people will never forget you. The legacy. 5 years later, the transformation was complete. Melodia had become a center for empathic healing and trauma counseling, with patients traveling from across the galaxy to receive treatment from Melodian healers. The species that had been nearly wiped out was now thriving, with a new generation of children born free from genetic sabotage. Elena's treatment protocols had been adapted for other species suffering from genetic engineering disasters. Dozens of beings who had been deemed defective by their creators were now living healthy lives, thanks to techniques pioneered in that small laboratory on the Nightingale. The Thracian Empire had officially apologized and paid reparations, though no amount of money could undo the damage they'd caused. But at least it was acknowledgement, validation that what had been done was wrong. Elena eventually returned to Earth, though she visited Melodia regularly. She became the youngest recipient of the Galactic Medal of Science, honored for her contributions to xenogenetics and interspecies medicine. But the award that meant the most to her was simpler: a small crystal, given to her by Lyric during her last visit to Melodia. It was a piece of his own resonating crystal, freely given as a symbol of permanent bond and family. In Melodian culture, Lyric explained as he placed it in her hands, we share our crystals only with pack family, those we consider part of our heart. You are my sister in all ways that matter, Elena. You gave me life when I had none. You gave my people a future when we had none. This crystal will let you feel our songs even across the stars. Elena held the crystal and felt it warm against her palm. It pulsed gently with Lyric's emotional signature, and she could sense his affection and gratitude as clearly as if he'd spoken the words. Thank you, she whispered, for trusting me, for letting me try. Thank you, Lyric replied, for being human, for being stubborn enough to believe that one person could make a difference, for proving that the galaxy's rejects and failures are worth more than anyone knew. As Elena's ship lifted off from Melodia, heading back toward Earth, she looked out the viewport at the planet below. It was covered in lights now, bioluminescent cities glowing against the purple landscape. A world that had been dead was now alive again, filled with hope and song, and the future of a species that refused to die. And it all started because one human looked at an auction listing and saw something nobody else had seen. Not a defective product or a failed experiment, but a person worth saving. Sometimes, Elena thought, the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to accept that some lives mattered less than others. And sometimes, the greatest scientific achievements came not from cold logic and calculated profit, but from the warmth of compassion and the stubborn belief that everyone deserved a chance. The galaxy had called Melodians defective, humanity had called them family, and that made all the difference.